Welcome to Very Rich Stories, where you will see stories of betrayal, secrets, and twists in real life. Today's story is about a boy born prematurely and what happened to him. The boy they refused to see. Born too soon, ignored too long. Daniel Hale was now a grown man, 23 years old, sitting working diligently at his desk at his father's manufacturing company, Hale Machinery. Their dad had built this company about 25 years ago after several other failures at entrepreneurship. His younger brother, Ethan, was either somewhere socializing or playing on his cell phone, surfing social media. Ethan doesn't do much at work, but he believes he does it all. He chats up the customers and they love it. And as his parents' golden boy, he has convinced them, Leo and Mary, that he is indispensable. All his life, Daniel was the one they loved the least. That was not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Baby Daniel was born premature. He was hooked to machines for the first 2 months of his life. At his birth, his father standing by defiantly muttering, "Are you sure his mind?" didn't help any. His mother, Mary, yes, Mary is exhausted. She tells relatives the baby barely made it. Ethan, Daniel's baby brother, arrived 2 years later. Ethan was full-term, weighed 9 pounds, healthy, loud, and everything Daniel was not. The parents adore Ethan and he quickly becomes the star in his parents' eyes. Daniel becomes the background kid, the quiet helper. Ever since his birth, Daniel could feel the rejection. He didn't know what it was or what it was called, but it made him feel some kind of way. To counter it, he worked harder and harder to be accepted. Even in his own family. Daniel is really smart, and even as a preteen, grows into the problem solver in his father's business. He's the one who finds a way to cut shipping costs. As a high schooler, he suggests moving the business online. The summer before college, he designs a better packaging method. But each time, his ideas are ignored until Ethan repeats them later in his own words. Then they celebrate Ethan instead of Daniel. Daniel suggests, "Dad, if we use digital invoicing." Leo, their dad, interrupts Daniel by saying, "Ethan already said that yesterday." This is discouraging because Daniel has been saying this for 3 months and no one has heard him. His dad just heard this yesterday? When Ethan said it. But when Ethan talks, anything Ethan says, they weigh it as important or groundbreaking. When you're the invisible child, even your echoes sound like someone else's brilliance. Daniel stays loyal anyway. He wants his family's love more than their praise. In the next quarter, the company hits a wall: supply issues, client loss, morale down. Ethan throws money at marketing gimmicks. Dad blames lazy workers and tariffs. Daniel quietly builds a side plan, a cost-saving restructure and local supplier partnership. When he presents it, they laugh. Ethan snarls, "You? Handle contracts." Daniel, "Stick to fixing printers." Joining Ethan's side, their dad scolds Daniel, "You always overthink everything." Daniel quietly continues working, ignoring their jabs. He thinks he has learned to deflect these attacks, but it has taken a toll on him emotionally. By this time, he knows that he is being rejected, and he begins to feel rejected. He finds he is hanging his head more than usual and spending time alone in his room. This is unusual for a young healthy man in his mid-20s. His family was oblivious. Ethan had the vibrant personality because Ethan was accepted and treated with joy all of his life. His family was clueless that they were building obstacles around Daniel. Not only that, they never knew that they would be the obstacles that Daniel would have to overcome. His own family. He was born fighting to survive. He grew up fighting to be seen. Daniel is the boy they refuse to see. When you exist in the world and you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, someone will finally see you. And it will be the right someone. Daniel entered this world too early, too fragile, and already, in his parents' eyes, too costly. Daniel may not have known that a nurse had said about him, he almost didn't make it. But he could feel it in the stress of his mother and the tension in his father. Leo sighs, exhausted as if he just went through labor and delivery. Without compassion to his wife, the woman who just gave birth, he says, "This little tiny baby. Are you sure he is mine?" As he looks at the boy's mother who he was forced to marry, accusingly. "I mean, how could I be the father of this? This little. He's too small. Mary. He's too small. 2 years later, here comes baby Ethan. He is healthy and perfect and adored by his father from the first second of his arrival. On Ethan's first birthday, Daniel, ignored as usual, is watching from a corner. Not in jealousy or hatred, but more in obscurity. When it was his birthday, he got a card, a cupcake, and a Matchbox car. Ethan is one and this party is off the chain. Lots of other kids, cakes, party favors, a clown and so many gifts, it looked like Christmas at the Hale household. Some children grow up knowing they were an accident. Others, like Daniel, are reminded every day. That was 20 years ago. But now, Daniel had completed his degree in business management and had come back home and back into the family business. He didn't know it, but Ethan was making an executive salary while Daniel, even with his college degree, was paid as a junior intern in his own father's business. At the small manufacturing company, Daniel's practical suggestions were still being brushed off day after day, week after week, even though he was now college educated. Still, he kept trying to contribute. Ethan, 21, didn't even want to go to college, repeats Daniel's ideas and suggestions, and gets praise. Daniel is still ignored and getting no recognition, but at least the family business is still running. The parents' pattern of favoritism was blatant. When people said, "Ethan, you're just like your father," that made Dad, Leo, proud. Ethan was his ego, essentially. Leo had bonded with Ethan as if they were best pals instead of father and son. They play around at work, chat all day, laugh, crack jokes, and then knock off early, change into their happy hour outfits and go to happy hour. The only thing louder than their suits was their colognes. Two different scents that fiercely opposed each other like two gladiators fighting to the death. Daniel keeps working late, quietly fixing what's broken. Even though he was born small and didn't thrive much as a kid, he often would forget to eat, being so focused on his latest project. He went to college thin and came back thin. He was not sickly, just thin-framed. He used what he learned in college in the family business, but he was still mostly ignored. "You know, Daniel," his father would say, "Ethan stayed here while you went to college, so he has more hands-on than you do." Daniel heard that as, "Son, shut up and let your younger brother run this." Ethan seemed to be the heir apparent. Daniel, ever respectful, would not buck against what his own father had already decided. But he kept working diligently, silently repairing Ethan's mistakes and sometimes lack of foresight by his own father. Leo and Ethan were best friends and would often go out together drinking. Daniel, who didn't drink at all and trying not to be judgmental, would often wonder if either or both of them were hungover, even at work. When you're invisible, your best ideas sometimes only travel with someone else's name on them. One humid afternoon, while Daniel was repairing a delivery schedule, an older gentleman stepped into the shop. Impeccable suit, quiet, observant eyes. Grandpa Solomon is Leo's dad, the boy's grandfather. He comes into the room, always smelling faintly of cedar and ledger ink. Solomon listens more than he speaks. He is a wise man. He is a seasoned entrepreneur who built a successful chain of import-export companies. Solomon Hale, his grandfather, the patriarch of the Hale name, owner of a chain of successful import companies that he has diversified into real estate and other holdings. He is semi-retired but sharp as ever. Solomon watched Daniel from a distance. He noticed the efficiency, the order, the humility, the respect. Later that evening, he called Daniel aside. Solomon says to the young man, "You keep this place running, don't you?" Daniel shrugs, "I try." Solomon continued, "No, you succeed. They just don't see it yet. Your college education shows, Daniel, that's why I had set up your college fund all those years ago." "Thank you, Grandpa. I appreciate everything." To be able to go to college and not have student loans was a load off my mind. Yes, that was the intention. Grandpa thinks to himself but doesn't say out loud, Ethan took his college money and didn't even go to university. Daniel will always remember that day because it was the beginning of everything. Feigning busyness and importance, Solomon's son Leo yells across the room, "Hi, Dad." Then Leo continued, rather insolent, did you come by to help out or to criticize? Actually, Leo, I came by to invite you and my 2 grandsons on a weekend with me, up to the lake house. We can go to the cabin on the lake, and fish and hike and… Ethan interrupted, Grandpa, thank you for inviting me, but I have to work and I have some previous plans. Ethan's excuses echoed in Solomon's ears as he thought to himself, this one is just like his father. Grandpa turned and said, Daniel, would you like to go? Sure, thanks. When do we leave, Grandpa? We can leave Thursday night, if that's okay with your dad, if he can spare you. Leo? Leo, distracted by some business fire, doesn't answer his father right away, but as Solomon waits for his son's answer, he notices Daniel's efficient system, tidy records, and respectful tone. Ethan is sitting at a messy desk across the room scrolling on his cell phone and laughing, talk or whatever it is called, his grandfather supposes. Every month or so, Grandpa Solomon would invite the boys and sometimes their dad to do something with him. Leo and Ethan were always busy or had other plans. Still, Solomon was careful and wise enough to invite everyone, although he knew it was only Daniel who would accept. Over months, Solomon is sharing wisdom and knowledge with Daniel and becomes his de facto business mentor. Daniel has his business management degree, but Grandpa Solomon is quietly grooming Daniel in hands-on, day-to-day management, ethics, and innovation. He tells Daniel, you think like a builder, not a borrower. That's rare. Daniel replied, I just want to make things better, Grandpa. Grandpa Solomon blesses him by saying, then you will soar in business. Hearing those words and just knowing that Grandpa Solomon saw him sparked something in Daniel, and he sat up a little straighter, a little taller that day. Daniel continues working humbly, still at the family shop for another few months, then Grandpa's offers to go fishing or hiking or foraging, or whatever. Their adventures become twice a month, then weekly. He and Daniel start meeting every weekend, Friday to Sunday. They golf, they go horseback riding. Grandpa introduces him to fencing and they later take archery classes. Grandpa is very interesting, active and diverse. Daniel is surprised how much so. On weekends, based on how quickly they met and had Daniel, Leo and Mary do limited things together, their only real connection is their adoration of Ethan. It's not like they've developed a real marriage, just a loose association, so Leo would be out doing his own thing and Mary would be either home or out with her friends. Ethan is regularly dating and partying with the excuse that after a long week he needs to blow off some steam. He is more like his father than he knows. Leaving Daniel to go with Grandpa. Daniel started to be at Grandpa's more than at home. No one noticed. No one cared. Leo and Ethan considered Daniel to be no fun anyway. He didn't even drink. It was as though he was invisible. Ethan said one day, when his dad asked where was Danny, oh, he's out with Grandpa again, probably learning how to be an old man. Me? I'm young. I've got more fun things to do. Leo laughed, remembering when he was that age. So proud of Ethan. Too proud. No one missed Daniel until the workflow began to stagnate. No one missed him until Ethan's poor decisions led the family business toward another downturn or collapse. Daniel, the boy they refused to see. Daniel had always been the quiet one. The one who stayed late to fix what others broke. The one who worked twice as hard just to be half seen. In his family, love was measured by loudness. And Daniel's silence never stood a chance. He came into this world early. 6 weeks before his time, small enough to fit in one hand. Machines breathed for him before he learned to cry. When he was born, his father, Leo, stood in the hospital doorway, arms crossed. He didn't ask to hold the baby. He just asked a question that would echo for decades. Are you sure he's mine? The ultimate question of a father's rejection. From that moment on, Daniel lived in the shadow of doubt. His mother tried, but exhaustion made her distant. And 2 years later, when Ethan was born. Strong lungs, loud laugh, easy smile. Their family found a new son to orbit. Leo's dream was the family's metalworks shop. He called it Hale Machinery, named after his own father. Ethan was raised to inherit it. Daniel was raised to help. By age 10, Daniel could balance the books better than the accountant. By 15, he'd found a cheaper supplier and reorganized the storeroom. Nobody noticed. Until Ethan mentioned maybe we should reorganize the next week. Then suddenly it was a stroke of genius. Daniel learned early that in that family, his voice needed Ethan's echo to be heard. Still, Daniel loved them. He believed love could earn him a seat at their table. At 19, he designed a website for the company. A free one. His father dismissed it. Our customers don't use computers. 2 years later, Ethan paid someone else to make a worse one. And they celebrated him like he'd invented the internets, the Googles, and everything else. Daniel smiled through it. He always did. Because he wasn't chasing applause. He just wanted acceptance. Even when they weren't out on weekends, on Sundays, Daniel would go to church with Grandpa, and after a nice Sunday dinner together, they'd sit in the library of Solomon's nice but practical house, surrounded by ledgers and old photographs. He taught Daniel how to read profit statements, negotiate contracts, and most importantly, how to know when silence is strength. Grandpa Solomon told Daniel, "Your father talks loud because he's still convincing himself. You don't need to shout when you know what you're doing." Week after week, Solomon poured decades of wisdom into the grandson that everyone else had overlooked. For Daniel, it was the first time someone looked at him and didn't see a burden, they saw potential. Then came another business downturn for Leo. Ethan made a series of bad investments, flashy trucks, poor contracts, high overhead. Gave himself a bonus and a unilateral raise, just because he was always running out of money by the end of every month and had even asked Daniel for loans. Once Daniel lent him money but he never paid it back, so he lent Ethan no more money. Leo backed Ethan every step of the way. Daniel had quietly warned them at each misstep. But they waved him off, did what Ethan wanted to do, anyway. Ethan always said to him, "We don't need your spreadsheets, little brother." Daniel, beginning to stand up for himself, responded, "Ethan, I'm older than you. You're the little brother." Leo added, "Stop worrying, Daniel. You always imagine the worst." Within months, orders dried up and the shop was bleeding money. Still, Daniel would stay late, patching things where he could, keeping the ship from sinking one nail at a time. Again and again, Ethan, who caused the mishaps, took credit for solving the very problems he caused. Daniel got no recognition. One night, Solomon called Daniel saying he'd seen enough. He saw the way Daniel stepped in to help his dad's company's issues, even though no one else seemed to recognize. Grandpa Solomon continued, "You've got vision, boy. I built my companies from nothing. But one day, they'll need someone who can keep them alive." Daniel, confused, supposed he meant Ethan. Solomon, smiling faintly, "No. I mean you." Their first talks are about practical things, numbers, contracts, supply lines. Daniel starts to feel seen but is still cautious, almost waiting for it to end. Solomon didn't rush him. He let Daniel's silence unfold like morning light, patient and steady. Solomon introduces him to small leadership tasks. Daniel had begun to shadowing meetings. Eventually, Solomon allowed Daniel to oversee small teams, traveling with him to supplier visits. One day Solomon said to Daniel, "You think clearer when you move your body, son. A strong mind deserves a strong frame." Daniel smiled awkwardly. He had always been the thin one, the one who looked breakable. But Solomon's tone wasn't teasing, it was belief. He started walking each morning before work. Then joined a small gym near Solomon's office, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. Not to bulk up or show off, but to build the strength he never believed he could have. Daniel began lifting light weights, sweating but steady. Then he changed his diet and started eating better, dressing sharper, standing taller. When someone finally believes in you, your body starts believing too. The more time they spent together, the stronger Daniel became, in mind, in voice, and even in body. He went 3 times a week at first, just the treadmill, some light weights, a few push-ups. The first few days, he ached everywhere. But something about that soreness felt right. It was the kind of pain that built instead of broke. Within a month, he hired a trainer named Marshall, who was calm, patient, the kind of man who believed in slow progress. They worked in small victories. 10 pounds on the dumbbell became 15. 3 sets became 4. The boy who once avoided mirrors started to look himself in the eye. Daniel started taking protein powder made into smoothies that Marshall recommended. Nothing fancy, just what would help his body keep up with his effort. He added spinach, chicken, and oats to his meals. No crash diets, no obsession. Just discipline. By month 6, his posture changed. By month 7, his energy matched his ambition. And by month 8, the scale showed a quiet miracle, 20 pounds gained. All muscle, all earned. It wasn't the bulky kind that screams for attention. It was the kind of strength that lives in the shoulders, in the handshake, in the way a man carries himself through a door. Healthy. Confident. Controlled. Solomon noticed the transformation too and said to his grandson, "Daniel, you're walking different." Daniel answered, smiling, "I guess I'm standing up straighter these days." Solomon, encouraging the young man, said, "No, son. You're standing up to yourself." The change wasn't about appearance. It was about ownership. Every rep, every burn, every ache, every meal was Daniel's declaration. He was no longer the boy waiting to be seen. He was becoming the man who saw himself clearly first. For the first time in years, Daniel looked in the mirror and didn't see the frail boy who'd been overlooked. He saw someone becoming. After 3 or 4 more months of mentorship, Solomon noticed something in Daniel beyond talent. It was a kind of hunger that wasn't about money or success. It was the hunger to grow. He said, "Son, Daniel, continue to travel with me when I go on my business trips and I will show you more about business. You've got a keen eye. And, since your dad doesn't seem to think you do anything in his business, come and work with me." Daniel agreed, and Grandpa put him on salary that more than doubled what Ethan was getting. But it didn't go to Daniel's head. He didn't spend it on a flashy car or flashy clothes or partying. He saved it. Grandpa noticed. Daniel didn't overspend on clothes, but when working with Grandpa Solomon, both looked polished and even dapper in business meetings. He had learned to dress conservative and classy, not faddish or gaudy. It was more than a year since Leo had first stepped into that gym. It had already been 2 years since Solomon had begun shaping not just his mind, but the man himself. One evening, Solomon invited him to a business gala downtown. It was a gathering of investors, CEOs, and longtime family friends. It was the kind of room Leo had never imagined himself belonging to. He straightened his bow tie 3 times before they entered the ballroom. He'd always been the quiet one at the edge of the room. But that night, he walked beside Solomon. Not behind him. Right into the center of that room. Daniel wore a simple dark suit that fit him perfectly. Broad shoulders now filled the fabric, confidence filled the air. He wasn't bulky or showy, just strong, healthy, and grounded. He looked like someone who belonged there. When they stepped inside, the first thing people noticed wasn't Solomon. It was him. Daniel. A few old colleagues whispered to each other. "Is that Daniel Hale? Leo's boy. He's changed. He carries himself like Solomon used to when he was a young man." Solomon smiled quietly. He didn't need to introduce him. Daniel's presence did the talking. During dinner, Daniel spoke when asked, clear and steady. He didn't try to impress. He didn't need to. When one executive challenged an idea he proposed, Daniel didn't flinch. He listened, thought, and answered calmly. Daniel was a perfect balance of intellect and humility. The same man who once stumbled over his own words now held a table's attention with quiet authority. Afterward, Solomon leaned over. Solomon quietly asked Daniel, "Do you hear that?" Daniel answered, "Hear what?" Solomon smiled at his grandson who he was so proud of and said, "Silence. That's what it sounds like when a room respects you." Daniel smiled, but didn't answer. He didn't have to. His whole life had been leading to that moment, the one where he didn't need to be introduced. He had arrived. In a world obsessed with loud success, Daniel learned the rarest kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Daniel thought that all of his life, his outside appearance had betrayed him because he was born too early. No, he was just born into a family that couldn't see his real worth, his real value, because they could only see his outside. Until one day, they would see him, this he knew. When the night ended, several attendees shook Daniel's hand. Not out of politeness, but recognition. A few asked for meetings. One offered a collaboration, another offered a partnership. As they left, Solomon said nothing for a long time. Then, outside under the city lights, he placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Solomon mused, "A year ago, I brought a quiet boy into my office. Tonight, I left with a man who can run an empire." He didn't tell Daniel right then, but that was the night that Grandpa Solomon decided to add Daniel's name to everything he owned, and he owned quite a bit. Grandpa Solomon had an empire, both of wisdom, expertise, and also wealth. Solomon officially starts setting up the Living Trust. He invites Daniel to co-sign documents, train with lawyers, and learn how real legacy is built. Their relationship now feels like father and son. Or rather, grandfather and rightful heir. In 2 years, Solomon did what life had failed to do in 20. He turned Daniel's silence into certainty. When Daniel stands before the new company sign, Grand Hale Holdings, he touches the engraved letters of their family name, Hale. His hand now strong and steady. He knows now that he is part of this company. But Daniel doesn't know how much Grandpa Solomon has entrusted to him. Not yet. Daniel doesn't know that the Grand in Grand Hale Holdings stands for him, the grandson of the owner of his vast empire. He doesn't know yet. Grandpa Solomon said, "We will hang this sign soon, Daniel, and this company will be rebranded." What Daniel does know is that the right time spent with the right person can heal a lifetime of being unseen, cast aside, and ignored. Solomon made arrangements quietly. Not a will, not a promise, but a living trust. Every company, every property, every share legally is now co-owned with Daniel. And Daniel is the 100% sole successor. He tells no one. Not even Daniel. It wasn't an act of favoritism, it was recognition. Solomon in his wisdom lived by this: when you give power to someone too soon, they waste it. When you give it to someone who's earned nothing, they lose it. But when you give it to the one who's learned by presence, time, attention, and a willingness to listen and learn, you secure a legacy. Grandpa Solomon thought to himself about his own son, Leo, who had refused legacy how many times? Solomon summed it up in his mind, not in bitterness, but in fact, "You don't give me time, I won't give you a dime." Then he thought of Leo's mini-me, Ethan. They were identical. It was a clear choice. Daniel was his heir. Daniel didn't know. All he knew was that his grandfather believed in him. And that was enough. Solomon passed away quietly 2 years later. Peaceful. Satisfied. He had lived a good life and left a great legacy. At the memorial there were polite condolences and a few family handshakes. In Daniel's his inbox, there was a message only 2 days after his grandfather's passing: "Per Mr. Hale's instructions, your co-ownership now becomes sole ownership." Daniel had sat still in his seat once he had gotten that message. He was not triumphant. Just seen. Daniel also didn't know that long before Daniel was born, and for many years, Solomon had pinned his hopes on another Hale. His own firstborn son, Leo. He wanted Leo to learn the business, to carry the Hale name into the next generation. He had all but begged Leo. But Leo had other plans. He was handsome, charming, and wild. While Solomon balanced books, Leo chased the nightlife and noise. Many Sundays when Solomon and Mary were dressed for church, Solomon would say, "Leo? Leo? Are you dressed? Are you ready for church?" Leo, still in bed and undercovers, was too tired from the night out before, so he almost never went with his parents to church. During the week, believing he was teaching his son, Solomon had, more than once, said to Leo, "One day this company will be yours, son." Leo laughed, "Then I hope it likes jazz and late nights, because I'm not built for ledgers." Leo walked in his freedom, into the party life, and away from the family business, told everyone he was starting something modern. It failed before it began. During those restless years, a short-lived and reckless romance brought Daniel into the world. A child conceived in uncertainty, born into hesitation. Solomon tried to reach out then, but Daniel refused the call. By the time Solomon met his grandson for the first time, Daniel was already old enough to stand in corners quietly, watching a family that didn't quite know what to do with him. Maybe that's why Solomon's eyes softened every time he looked at the boy. Because he didn't just see Daniel, he imagined the second chance his own son had thrown away. The family gathered, expecting to hear about the will, though most, especially Leo, already assumed there was never much there, and there wasn't much left. The attorney stood calmly, opening a worn leather folder and saying, "There isn't a will to read today." Because Mr. Hale handled his affairs while he was very much alive. Leo frowned. "What do you mean?" The attorney replies, "I mean that 2 years ago, exactly 26 months, to be precise, Mr. Hale created a living trust, transferring all ownership and rights of his companies. It was reviewed, notarized, and witnessed in full. There are no other assets to divide, there is no dispute to be made." Leo muttered, "I can't believe it, he left us nothing." Ethan sighed. The old man had favorites, probably strangers or some charity. After the lawyer spoke, when Ethan realized there was nothing in it for him, when he really realized it, Ethan said Grandpa must have changed it at the last minute. The lawyer said, "No, son. The documents were signed 2 years before. 2 years before his passing, Solomon had already placed Daniel's name beside his own on every deed, every account, every company seal. Not in secret. Not in haste. But in confidence. He gave Daniel joint ownership long before his health ever declined. This was no last-minute change, it was his legacy plan. Grandpa Solomon wasn't just teaching Daniel, he was transferring the torch, something that he had been wanting to do since his own son had been Daniel's age. A longing he had been waiting 30 years for, but Leo didn't want the family business, he wanted to do his own thing. Grandpa Solomon's living trust wasn't a sudden inheritance done in anger or haste. It was a long, deliberate handover. Solomon knew the world would question his choice, so he left them no room to argue. After the party animals, Leo and Ethan realized that Solomon left everything to Daniel in that living will signed and dated and notarized 2 years earlier. There is nothing to challenge. Because Daniel already owns it. The quiet, faithful one was chosen because of years of consistency, not a sudden twist. Solomon Hale was gone, but his order, his foresight, and his sense of justice remained. Grandpa Solomon was so proud of Daniel, who had blossomed right before his very eyes, so Grandpa had established a living trust while he's still alive. All his companies and assets were legally co-owned with Daniel as successor. It's done quietly and airtight. Not out of spite, but recognition. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a vote of confidence. The room fell silent. Grandpa Solomon had seen what everyone else refused to see. And he'd made sure that when the time came, there would be no doubt whose hands his life's work belonged in. "Well, our business is probably worth more than his tinkering was worth, anyway." "No, Mr. Hale, your father's businesses are worth considerably more than you may realize." Leo blurted, "But I thought he was just tinkering with some small business that wasn't worth much. I didn't care if he transferred it or who he gave it to." The attorney speaks again to make sure all understand it. "Mr. Hale, Leo, don't you remember the signing of this document? You were not only a witness, you affixed your signature on it and notarized it." Leo wondered if he had been drinking that day and just didn't pay attention. "No, Leo," the attorney said. "Your father had substantial holdings." Then he read what could have sounded like a financial eulogy, if there is such a thing. At the time of the creation of that living trust, Solomon Hale owns a chain of import-export businesses. He owns old money logistics, wealth, ships, warehouses, distribution contracts, trade hubs, and decades of reinvested earnings. Core import-export operations. Solomon has 6 companies. Established 40 years ago. Across ports in the US, West Africa, and Europe. Worth $220 million. Commercial real estate holdings, warehouses, port offices, logistics centers, long-term leases. Worth 80 million. Fleet assets, ships, trucks, logistics, equipment. Depreciating assets but still valuable, well-maintained and insured, worth 35 million. Liquid investments, stocks, bonds, reserves. Conservative investor, long-term dividends and trade reserves. Valued at 60 million. Personal property, residences, art, antiques, modest compared to his business wealth, understated luxury. Valued at 12 million. Solomon Hale was extremely wealthy but not ostentatious. His fortune was built on discipline and longevity, not flash or speculation. The kind of businessman who could quietly own half the shipping docks in a region without ever trending online. Solomon Hale, founder of Hale International Imports, was worth approximately $450 million US, which now all belongs to his heir and grandson, Daniel. Daniel heard all of that, but he valued the time, the care, the love of a grandparent more than the money. Daniel thinks to himself, he gave me a fortune in wisdom, in acceptance. Grandpa saw me. Solomon Hale is wealth written with restraint. You can practically hear him saying, money isn't the legacy. Stewardship is. He's the sort of man who would have quietly taught you how to read a balance sheet and how to keep your word. Ethan couldn't hold back any longer and blurted out, but he wore boring clothes all the time. Look, Daniel is dressing like him now. Then he looked at the lawyer, who also was dressed conservatively, then Ethan shut up. Seems he and his dad were the only two overdressed in flashy clothes. He dared speak again, and he drove that old Bronco. It wasn't even a new Bronco, it was really old. Daniel sat still, eyes full but unbroken. The world had finally caught up to what one man saw all along. And the parts of Grandpa they didn't know about and didn't see was because Leo and Ethan did not spend any time with him. Grandpa Solomon had opened up life for Daniel, more than his parents who sired him and gave birth to him did. Grandpa was his real father by time, love and attention. Daniel didn't just inherit financial wealth. He inherited trust. The kind built only by time and proof. He inherited knowledge and wisdom that had grown, not in arrogance, but a rich confidence in himself. All these things were invisible to Ethan and unimportant to Leo. All traces of rejection were gone. He was accepted by his grandpa. And he had learned to accept himself, no matter what others thought of him. Daniel left the reading quietly. No speeches, no gloating. Just a combination of an ache, missing Grandpa Solomon, and a piece of knowing who he was, and that Grandpa had affixed his name, his trust, his confidence in Daniel, years ago. After the meeting ended, the attorney handed Leo a sealed envelope with Solomon's handwriting across it. Bold, steady, unmistakable. He read it there in silence, while Ethan remained seated beside him, face fallen, all playfulness finally gone, and finally wordless. Leo, my son. For the past 30 years, I asked you, time and again, to come into the family business. You always said you wanted to make your own way, and I respected that, until I realized what you truly wanted was to live without discipline. You started your own ventures and abandoned all but two, your current business and Ethan. You inherited my name but not my patience. Years later, I watched you do the same with your firstborn. Daniel's ideas you dismissed. His efforts you overlooked. You bypassed your first son to make Ethan your heir. I cannot correct the past, but I can honor what is right. So I must now do what you once did. Reject me. So now I must bypass my first and only son, you, to bless the grandson who carries the heart I always hoped you'd have. I named you Leo because you were always intended to be my lion. A lion from a wise man named Solomon, but instead Daniel, even in the lion's den, could have been consumed or wasted away, but he was not. He arose from the den, from the corners, from obscurity to become second in command in my empire, and now that I am gone, Daniel can rule. Do not see this as punishment, Leo. See it as restoration of the Hale name and of what it should have stood for. All the best to you and your wife, Mary, and to Ethan. Solomon. For the first time in his life, Leo had nothing to say. Leo had crowned the one that was like him because he couldn't see that anything was wrong with himself. Leo couldn't see that he needed nurturing, maturing, or improvement in any way. Not only that, he had crowned Ethan too early, ignoring the true prince in his midst. That was his second mistake. The first mistake was creating a prince before he, himself, became a king. Leo hadn't even accepted or embraced being a prince himself, declaring himself finished and ready, but he was not. Yet, there he was in the party life creating another prince. And for the first time, Daniel had nothing left to prove. It wasn't revenge that passed the torch, it was redemption. A boy created too soon by a father who lived life in the wrong order. It's about a son born too soon, a man who saw him in time, and a father finally forced to look back, only to see Daniel too late. And, in the mirror that was Daniel, Leo realized that he had rushed all the wrong things in life. Months passed. Headlines began to appear in local papers, online articles, and interviews, as well as on the covers of magazines. Hale Imports rebrands under new leadership. A younger vision revives classic Hale Industries. It's now branded Grand Hale Holdings. The Grand is for Solomon Hale's eldest grandson, Daniel. His family was stunned. They had assumed Solomon's company went to charity or closed down. Until they walked past a billboard that read, Grand Hale Holdings. Building tomorrow, today. At first, they didn't believe it, they were shocked all over again. Then came the awe of seeing Daniel on his first business magazine cover. The grandson who quietly rebuilt a dynasty. Leo dropped the magazine. Ethan just whispered, how in the world did this happen? Daniel never gloated. He sent his parents a handwritten note. I hope you're doing well. If you ever need anything, my door is open. No bitterness. No revenge. Just peace. He remembered the words of Grandpa Solomon often. Sat under the same tree in the backyard of his grandfather's house remembering his grandfather's sage advice. Daniel lived here now, he had inherited this modest house as well, and it was fine. It was enough. Daniel whispers aloud. You were the only one who saw me, Grandpa. You are the one who encouraged me to lift my head. I hope I'm making you proud. He was born fighting to breathe. Grew up fighting to be seen. But in the end, he didn't have to fight to be chosen. Because the one who truly saw him had already written his name where it mattered most. Not on paper, but in purpose. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They're the ones still building while everyone else is talking. Grand Hale Holdings will always be successful and remembered because it is in the right hands. Thank you for tuning in to Very Rich Stories. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. It's free and it helps our channel out tremendously. See you in the next story.